In our timeline, the Soviet Union had collapsed relatively peacefully in the year of 1991, ending the Cold War. But what if the Soviet Union wasn't the only unlucky one? What if the United States of America also collapsed at the end of the Cold War? Would a new world superpower emerge? Would this American collapse be as peaceful as the Soviet one? How would they collapse? Let me show you what I came up with. To start off, the narrative of the video is not possible. The only way we can have this possibly happen is if we change the Cold War drastically, starting all the way back to the 1940s. But that would spiral out of control and give us a completely different scenario. Instead, I'll have to get the build up to the scenario and focus on the events itself, as well as the aftermath. Thus, sorry if the reasoning for the collapse is quite bad, but again, it's impossible. Starting off, we want the American economy to enter a recession. Having them spend a ton of money during the Cold War on useless projects is a good start, so you know what they were already doing to begin with. If we pair this with some economic mismanagement, then the Americans would not be doing very well. Next, we want the government to be unpopular. Having the United States involve itself in a few more wars outside its territory and suffering a ton of losses is one way of doing this. Afghanistan is always available. Lastly, we need some more political instability, another Cold War classic. Luckily for us, 1992 is an election year. With the changes that we've made, it's obvious that neither party is too favorable, so it would be very close. If we also have the administration in charge and we're going to say that it's Bush for simplicity, mismanaged the collapse of the Soviet Union, the nation would be suffering from enough instability. In 1992, we'll have the election be very tight, with a rather controversial court case solidifying the presidency for Bush, who would have been known for mismanaging multiple wars and the collapse of the Soviet Union. This election result would be contested by several states that would make up New England, Cascadia, Minnesota and California, with all of them claiming that Bill Clinton was the legal president. Bush would then declare martial law, sending the military into these states that would suffer massive riots. Is this realistic? Well, absolutely not. The US just collapsing like this is not possible. But hey, this is the video you clicked on, so let's keep it up. California would likely be the first one to officially secede from the Union, as they basically have the industry needed to function as their own separate country, as well as the population and connections. This would be followed by other states with regional identities like New England and Cascadia. As the situation devolves, states that even sided with Bush would declare independence as well, like Texas and Florida. As New York leaves as well, upstate New York would rather join New England. We could see the city to break off from the state, as it would join the newly independent New Jersey, as they're more culturally similar, while becoming the nation's capital. From here, the government would effectively collapse, with all the regions gaining independence choosing to focus on themselves instead of staying with the collapsing government. Oklahoma would break free and join Texas. Other states like Louisiana and Mississippi would unite, as these states are on average poorer than the other states, and this union would help them form a stable enough economy to stand on their own. Carolina might break free as well, due to the strong regional identity, but they would be closer to Florida and the South. Out west, there would be a lot of military bases in Southern California, Nevada and Arizona. The military of the United States of America would likely act separately and seize these areas from California and the surrounding states, keeping it under their own control, in hope to eventually return it to the American government. This would lead to Arizona and Nevada to break free in outrage, followed by Utah and New Mexico. This region would see drastic changes very quickly, with Nevada's economy quickly collapsing as the military would take control over Las Vegas. We could see Nevada to be split between Utah and California. Arizona and New Mexico would have to unite, and they could suffer a swift invasion from Texas. Either that or Texas manages to seize territory up to the Rio Grande River, before Nevada would declare independence. Either way, New Mexico and Arizona would effectively become a tributary state to Texas. In the Pacific, California could manage to take control over Hawaii and other American territories in the Pacific. Alaska might go to California as well, but I believe it's more likely for them to join Canada as a separate province. Minnesota, Wisconsin and Iowa could join together to form a Midwest Union, as they would combine to have a strong economy that could stand on their own. Michigan's Upper Peninsula could also join the state, or be seized by the new nation. Lastly, the Great Plains would break free, forming the largest breakaway state, and focus mostly on agricultural industries. The remnants of the United States would change its form of government to something more federative, hoping not to lose any more land and to take back more control. Thus, the Electoral College would likely be abolished and replaced with majority rule. Either that or it would be reformed. Puerto Rico would likely be kept by this administration, as Puerto Rico cannot stand as an independent state so suddenly. The island may even be given statehood to increase the number of votes being cast, as well as increasing American presence in the Atlantic. Most of these American breakaway states would likely adopt democracy with some forms of the American system, save for the American military in the West. This is to be expected as most of these breakaway states were against the American democratic system and would want to make some changes that they think would be more effective. Now let us take a look with the world stage, and what this collapse of the world's strongest country would do internationally. First off, American bases in foreign countries are either abandoned or illegally transferred to the American realm state. China would then step up and become the strongest nation on earth, taking over a ton of American trade. NATO itself would panic and possibly expand membership faster in a hope to make up for the lack of the United States, which could mean that Ukraine could manage to get membership before the year of 2000. Other important events in American history also wouldn't happen, such as the 1993 World Trade Center bombings and hence 9/11. The Yugoslav wars also wouldn't see as much foreign intervention, which could be good or bad, hard to say. One huge change in the war or terror likely doesn't happen. This is due to the 9/11 terror attacks not happening as well, so there isn't a reason and a candidate to invade Iraq or Afghanistan. This also means that the Islamic State and Al-Qaeda would be much more influential and would continue to terrorize Africa and the Middle East. Another huge change is that Russia and China would begin to grow bolder. While Russia is a relatively new state, their collapse certainly wasn't expected to be peaceful. With America now gone, they might launch some invasions to nations like Georgia and Kazakhstan as to secure their regional interests, as well as possibly seizing Crimea sooner. I think that they would be successful in Georgia and the invasion of Crimea, but Kazakhstan will take a while. Eventually though, Russia would manage a victory and establish a puppet regime, as well as annex some of the north. As for China, some of their disputes in Central Asia would be dealt via wars. Kyrgyzstan and Tajikistan are largely claimed by China, and without anyone seemingly being able to protect them, they would invade and annex both nations. The rest of Central Asia would fall into Chinese and Russian sphere of influence. Central Asia is not the only part of the world that would see some changes. Without the United States, China would begin to threaten Taiwan a lot more than historically. I wouldn't be surprised if they invaded the island by the year of 2000, and I can't really say if the world would be able to stop them. Japan, South Korea and India would protest this invasion, but I don't see them getting fully involved, as they would also have to deal with the American collapse as well, which would likely damage their economies greatly. I mean, just think how devastating the 2008 financial crisis was to the world, and now we can assume that it would be much worse. Many nations wouldn't want to start wars or join wars at this point, except Russia and China, which were not tied down to the American sphere so much, so their economies were mostly in a vacuum, thus taking less of a hit if they were to start some wars. In Europe, NATO would further panic. Their strongest member had not only just collapsed, but Russia would be going on a little wild spree. We could possibly see the extension of NATO membership to other nations like the Baltics to be delayed, out of fear that this would drag Europe into a war that they couldn't win. The collapse of the United States would also affect the European Union. It's hard to say, but the federalization of the European Union could either speed up or slow down. On one hand, it might speed up, as the people would call for a stronger union as to stand up to Russia and other world threats. On the other hand, however, people could see the failure of the United States of America and shy away from the ideas of federalization. Let's go back to the Americas. Assuming that the collapse is mostly peaceful, we could see these new countries to establish their borders and fall into a new status quo. The remnants of the American government would be recognized as the successor of the United States and would be swapped with their debt, sending the rest of the country into a recession. In the South, the new American Republic would be made up of poorer states that would need to rely on trade with outside nations to prop up their economy. Carolina and Florida would be alright economically for a little while, but over time might face some economic problems. In the North, New England and Superior would go closer to Canada and possibly join NATO, but only if the American Federation isn't in it already. Out west, things would be a little bit more difficult. Even with a larger state, Utah likely cannot stand on their own. I don't see them as joining the Great Plains, so having them grow closer to California would be a lot more likely. Cascadia might also grow closer to California due to their shared political views. Neither of these states would want to join California outright, but they would become de facto puppet states over time. As for the American military, they would be aligned with the American Federation, but wouldn't really have a way of reaching them. Slowly the military would eventually form an official government, likely with a figurehead president to keep the people happy. There would be thousands of butterfly effects in this scenario, and not many of them would be predictable, as you may see. Firstly, does rewriting history make it past 100,000 subscribers before my birthday in March? Oops, looks like I started with the wrong segment, so let us roll with it. If you aren't already, consider subscribing to the channel, as it helps me make more videos like this. If you don't feel like subscribing, consider leaving the video a like and checking out another one of my videos. It's all for free. Alright, let us get back to the scenario. One region with a lot of butterfly effects that I cannot even try to possibly predict would be Africa. There would be too many conflicts that would erupt or restart once America would be gone from the continent, especially with ISIS and other groups not being defeated, so they would wreak havoc, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. Needless to say, many wars would break out worldwide, and the era of peace set up after the Cold War of our history would be replaced with the era of conflict. The world's politics would have switched drastically, and polarizing forces of the world would be a lot more blurred. Maybe 2 decades down the line, 3 superpowers would emerge. First off, China. It's self-explanatory that China would eventually become a superpower. Their sphere of influence is likely larger, and with America gone, they would have the world's largest economy, or will in the following years. Secondly, the European Union, federalized or not, this organization would basically head NATO at this point and support democratic regimes around the world, taking America's place. Do they manage to get to America's strength? Well, no, not at all, but they will try their hardest to do so. Likely NATO goes through a name and policy change, which would extend the alliance to be more global, as to combat China and other superpower, which we're getting into. Nations like Japan, South Korea, Australia, and some American breakaway states, and maybe even India as well, could join NATO, worried about their sovereignty. The last superpower to mention would be Russia. The Russians would be by far the weakest of the 3 superpowers. Their sphere of influence would be limited to the Caucasus and Central Asia, with their European borders likely not changing too much from our history. We could see the Ukraine war to possibly start much sooner and would likely end in a Russian victory, which would still take many years. Belarus may unite with Russia later on as well, creating the Union State. These 3 superpowers would be at odds with each other, with China and Russia fighting over influence in Central Asia and the Middle East, the European Union and China fighting over influence in Africa and the Pacific, and Russia and the European Union fighting over Eastern Europe and Turkey. Overall, the world would be much more tense, and this is as far as I can realistically take this scenario. But this was just one way of an American collapse happening, and it was relatively peaceful, much like the Soviet collapse, just with the rest of the world thrown into disarray. However, a peaceful collapse of America is not guaranteed. Let us look at a second ending where the United States of America would fall into a civil war. We would have the same build-up and the same point of divergence the 1992 election, Bush versus Clinton. We'll have Bush to still win, but as the protests would begin to heat up against the results of the election, Bush initiates for martial law and sends in the military. Once California declares independence, the American military would begin their offensive, focusing on the south. Once the army gets closer to Los Angeles, New England would also likely leave the Union, followed by Texas. The military continues to spread out, making initial pushes against the revolting states. Cascadia would break free next, forcing the government forces to fight on an even larger front. As this would get even worse, the military would begin to question their allegiances to the government, and many would deflect to the revolting states. At the outbreak of the Civil War, NATO would rush to send in support to the American government, with Japan, Britain and Canada likely being given permission to secure temporary control over America's Pacific territories, including Hawaii, Puerto Rico and Alaska for the time being. These territories wouldn't be annexed, but they would become run by these nations occupying them, perhaps with the local government functioning like a protectorate. This would only outrage the people of the United States of America, and we could see even more revolts to break out at an even larger scale. Some states might not revolt, but their larger cities would. Salt Lake City, Chicago, Denver and the Twin Cities would be an example of these. These cities would largely support themselves in most regards and would begin to set an example for other American cities. Atlanta, Tampa, Jacksonville, New Orleans and other pockets in the United States would begin to revolt, less so for independence and more so for government change. In the West, where American forces would be the most prevalent, we could see these states to break away. Nevada and Arizona are 2 likely ones, as they would see the brunt of the fighting and crack down. Nevada cannot stand as a nation itself and would likely join California after weeks at most. Arizona, I think, would be in a much better state than in the previous timeline, as half of their country wouldn't be under the direct control of the military junta. Instead, they would just have to kick the already exhausted and demoralized soldiers from their claimed territory. I could also see Arizona getting into conflicts with Texas about the fate of New Mexico as well, as both would want to scoop up this territory. I think that the Rio Grande River would serve as a fair dividing line for the two, as they would manage to meet up in the middle. With the West falling, the states suffering from anti-government revolts in the large cities would decide to side with the revolts instead of declaring independence. The first one to do so is likely Illinois, as their largest city and most of their population would have already been under the revolt. Minnesota would be next, as their capital would fall in the opening weeks of the revolt. States like Utah, Colorado, New York and Pennsylvania would follow suit, siding with who I would be calling the reformists. Reformists in New York would also strike a deal with New England, where they would sign a truce in exchange for equal representation when the whole ordeal is over. In the West, Utah and Colorado would likely strike similar deals with California and Arizona, giving them some breathing rooms, and essentially finally securing independence. As the United States of America continues to further fall apart, more states would side with the reformists, like Florida, Georgia, and much of the Midwest. At this point, the American government would come forward to most of these states that had just declared independence in hopes of a deal, as they cannot fight this civil war and secure these breakaway states anymore. California would be allowed to leave the Union and keep Nevada. Texas would also get to leave and annex land up to the Rio Grande. Texas' western borders would be established by the Red River, annexing some of the Texas Panhandle into Oklahoma, while giving up some of Louisiana to Texas. Arizona would gain independence as well and annex the rest of New Mexico. Cascadia and New England wouldn't be given any such deals. They would be seen as weaker states that could possibly be dealt with, and New England would essentially be backing the revolts anyways. These deals, however, would only make some of the revolts even worse. In what is left of Louisiana, we could see the government to officially side with the revolts, as most of their state was given to Texas, so this section of the revolt would be the most extreme section compared to the other ones. As for the three nations officially granted independence, we could see them focused inwards for the time being. None of these nations would really want to get involved in the Second American Civil War anymore. They would like to focus on their economies. California might support Cascadia financially, as they would have a slightly smaller border with the United States, but they wouldn't be sending any troops as to assist them. By the end of the Civil War, this is what continental United States would look like. First thing you may notice is obvious, Oklahoma has grown greatly. To the 5 viewers from Oklahoma, consider this video what if everything went perfect for Oklahoma. On a more interesting note, the reformists were already close to Washington DC, as they had already taken New York and Pennsylvania. New Jersey would be surrounded by the reformists and likely would join the movement at this point. As the situation continues to devolve into chaos, we'd see Bush to be impeached and replaced with another figure. The Midwest could fall to the reformists, with states like Michigan and Wisconsin officially siding with these revolts. This would be the point where America reluctantly would sign peace with Cascadia, seeing that they couldn't really deal with them anymore. Within a year of the Americans signing peace with Texas and California, the reformists would take Washington DC. The president would be likely evacuated and escorted out of the area, but then the Civil War is basically over. America cannot crush the reformists, and while the reformists are likely going to win, they don't really have the ability to secure the entire nation. So what I can see happening is an armistice line agreed on, as the reformists managed to overrun the eastern seaboard. There are two reasonable borders we could use for this division. The first one is the Mississippi River. This makes the most sense, and with a few smaller border changes, we can secure the reformists get territories in some of the states that supported the movement but would be part of America, like St. Louis and the Twin Cities. However, I find this division boring and I want an excuse to Google more about the American river system. I have decided to create a new border that I find largely fair, but it also looks a little bit more natural and interesting. First off, Minnesota and Iowa would be split among the Des Moines River, linking up with Mississippi. Missouri would then be split horizontally with the Missouri River and go south along the state. Arkansas would be split via the Arkansas River and link up with Mississippi down south to the Texas border. Louisiana would be abolished, and for the 7 Louisianan viewers that I have, consider this what if everything went terrible for Louisiana video. In the West there would be more land changes. We could see Idaho to break away from the remnants of America and join Cascadia, as they would be more similar culturally with the eastern half of the country than the rest of America. Utah and Colorado could break free into a Rocky Mountain state, as they would be part of the reformist uprising, but couldn't link up with the rest of the reformists. Then again, they could also fail and get annexed into America. Since we're having an American co-ops video, I would have this separation happen. New England would be in a strange limbo. They would stay independent for a while, but with a new American government, they might join the reformists if they feel like America is better off under them. Overseas, other territories would be occupied. Alaska would be annexed into Canada after a referendum. Hawaii would become independent but a Japanese protectorate. And Puerto Rico would be under the control of Britain, who might add it to the Commonwealth or make them independent at some point. The world's response to such an event is likely similar to the end of the previous scenario, save maybe for China and Russia doing more stuff, while Europe would be distracted with the Civil War. By 2010, NATO is likely even weaker than in the previous scenario. How the timeline goes from here is impossible to say, more so than the previous option. The reformists are likely going to attempt a different form of democracy, where the people would control more of the government itself, possibly attempting direct democracy. If this succeeds is impossible to say, but it would surely be very interesting. To finish off, what if everything went perfect for Oklahoma video, the remnants of the United States capital is now likely in Oklahoma City. If you want me to explore more scenarios like this where nations collapse for no good reason, feel free to say so in the comments. Make sure to like and subscribe as it really helps me out making these videos. Check out this video where the Soviet Union collapses into civil war instead of peacefully. I hope you have a great day and goodbye.